At this juncture the parent sun began to give birth to another atom. As this expulsion was completed, Uranus was born. The extra force emitted with the expulsion threw Neptune out of its cradle or smaller orbit into a more extended one. It was compelled to take the orbit now occupied by Mercury to make room in the cradle orbit for the newborn child, Uranus, in order that it might receive its nourishment from the parent until its nebulous structure became a planet. Again, conditions settle down and go well for a long period of time. Neptune, the first child, is growing up and coming nearer to the conditions where it can support life. In fact, amoebic forms are appearing in its cloudish, brackish water or inland seas. Then another atom is ready to come forth, and Saturn is born. The extra force given out at the time of this expulsion sends Uranus out of the cradle orbit, and it also sends Neptune out of the orbit now occupied by the planet Venus. Neptune was now sufficiently cooled, and its surface developed to a stage where it was able to support life. It was upon this planet, as it occupied this orbit, that the conditions for the support and nourishment of human life which the Earth enjoys today were brought to the stage where the human life element could attach itself to the select amoeba necessary for the support and manifestation of the human form. Thus came into existence the first human race, not the animal amoeba, but the human amoeba, the amoeba of selective type and character, with intelligence that could and did shorten the process of evolution. Upon this planet conditions were perfect for selective human development, and this development came on at a rapid pace. There were no lower animal organisms, thus animal life did not develop. The planet was occupied by superior human beings who rapidly developed into a perfect human race, who were all able to supply and support themselves directly from cosmic or aqueous substance. Thus they would have been termed gods upon this earth. Many of the legends and myths of today have their inception in and are built around this great people. They were exactly like the principles that brought them into existence. This race, through their ability to express beauty and perfection, began to surround themselves with perfect and beautiful conditions. In fact, they built the planet into a paradise of beauty and perfection. It was intended that this race should forever maintain this perfect condition upon which they had accomplished by absolute control of all the elements. Thus, when they put forth a desire, it was fulfilled instantly. As time moved on, some began to evidence inactivity and selfishness in attempting to outdo their fellow man. This condition brought on divisions, and divisions brought on selfishness and greed, which caused dissensions. The time that should have been spent in creating for service and advancement was dissipated in strife and contention. Instead of holding closely to their source, they were differing and separating widely until all but a few lost that which was high and noble. All but the few let go of their security and protection. This caused a vortex to gather around the planet. Instead of holding to the perfect pattern of the divine, whereby they could have accomplished a complete universe of divine attributes upon divine planets, they gave way to such an extent that when the next outburst occurred, it was so enormous that when the nebula was consolidated, the resulting planet was larger in mass than all of those which had previously come forth. Thus the great planet Jupiter came forth. The excess energy given out was so gigantic that it swept Saturn out of the cradle orbit into the orbit now occupied by Mercury. The outburst was so tremendous, and the solar system so filled, that great quantities of asteroids formed, arrayed, and aligned themselves around Saturn. Being of a different polarity, they could not coalesce with Saturn. Thus they were independent, and their only alternative was to align themselves around the planet of Saturn as bands of asteroids. As such, they are commonly called the rings of Saturn. Some of these asteroids are as large as planets. The force swept Neptune the Great and Beautiful out into the orbit now occupied by the Earth. All of its magnificence, with its great inhabitants, save a few, were swept away. Those who were preserved had never let go of their divine heritage, and they had so constituted their bodies that they could seek safety in the emanations of the spirit sphere, which is all around and interpenetrates the 91 universes now in existence. In this condition, they have been able to preserve their identity and knowledge and give it out so that it will never pass out of existence. It is through and by these ideas that we live today. We claim kinship with these great ones. They compose the root race of humanity. By them the ideas of humanity have been preserved, and the Godhead of man has been maintained. Then followed many millions of eons of time needed for the nebula of Jupiter to take form as a planet. So enormous is its size that it has cooled but little even today. Time again passes on with swift wings, and the sun is ready to give birth to the fifth nebula, and Mars, the blood-red planet, is brought into existence. As this expulsion is complete, we see a phenomenon happening in mighty Jupiter. A huge red spot has suddenly developed on her side, and she is expelling a great portion of herself. She has given birth to a satellite, which is called a moon. There is such an excess of force set up as the two expulsions take place that the giant Jupiter is thrown out of the cradle orbit, and room is made for the planet Mars. As the giant Jupiter occupies its new orbit, the whirling nebulous form is in no way able to gather to itself the great mass of particles that were expelled at the time of its birth. These particles were so far flung that they came within the influence of Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Mars, but being of a different polarity, they could not be assimilated by those planets. They became separate asteroids without planetary polarity. Thus they cannot take their place as planets and rotate in order and unison around the central sun. Consequently, they fly into space as vast swarms of meteors, with no rhythm of movement, speeding with fearful velocity to collide with and embed themselves in the surface of other planets, or to be torn to pieces through the impact of collision. Also, in their mad rush through space, minute particles are carried away until they will gradually return to the aqueous mass, where they can be again taken up and assimilated by the great central sun, to be given off again as nebula at the birth of other planets or atoms. Now comes the outburst that gives birth to the nebula that finally forms our Earth. Mars is thrown out of the cradle orbit, and our Earth takes its place. Thus all of the planets are sent out into another orbit to give space for the new child. Then Venus is born. In like manner, the Earth and all other planets or atoms are thrown into ever-expanding orbits in order to make room in the cradle for the newborn planet or atom. Then Mercury is born, throwing the other planets or atoms into another widened orbit, making up the full complement of planets that are visible through astronomy today, 8 in all. There are really 9, as the cradle orbit is not occupied by Mercury. It is occupied by the last nebula or child, but that nebula has not consolidated into form so that it can be seen. It is there nevertheless, and its influence is felt.